You're listening to Witch Wednesdays, a semi-weekly podcast source for all things witchcraft in the modern world. Join your host, Steph, on Wednesday mornings to chat about seasons, Sabbats, and all new witchcraft topics to help you make your life more magical.
Welcome back to Witch Wednesdays. I'm Steph, and I have a guest here with me today, one of my favorite people to chat with, somebody that you have already heard from, but it's been a while and there have been some updates. So I'm going to welcome her back and turn it over so she can introduce herself and let you know where you can find her online.
Hey, Steph, thanks so much. I'm Tenae, and I'm known online as the Witch of Lupine Hollow. And I have several books out. I'm the author of 3 books. My newest one is coming out this summer, Botanical Cocktails.
Congratulations. That's so exciting to have a brand new book out. And I do have it here in front of me. And once again, it's absolutely beautiful and totally in line with the other books that you have released, which I always appreciate that I'm like, these make sense together. And this looks like they're from the same author. Yay.
They do. Yeah, they're like not quite a series, but they really did such a great job making them really flow together.
I do. And then I like looking at it on my shelf and I know exactly which ones are yours. I'm like, oh, yes, there it is. Spot it.
Oh, I love it.
So let's talk a little bit for, you know, listeners who might be new to you. What is it since like the last update that you have been doing? Have there been any changes or new developments in your practice or your life?
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, my life is very different. So I went through a very, very big transition last year, in 2023. So my partner of 6 years and I split up. I moved out of our house, moved back in with friends, and that's been a really big transition, obviously, a really difficult one. But we're kind of on the other side of it at this point. And it's been one of those years where it's like all of this really difficult, really challenging stuff happened. But a lot of growth and healing always happens through those periods. But also there's been a lot of good stuff too. I've really been really, really close with some really great friends, which I wouldn't say I don't really necessarily practice with friends. I'm mostly solitary, but I would say that like I've been able to share my practice with friends more in the last year or so, which has been really beautiful. And yeah, the business Lupin Hollow has really grown so much, which has been amazing to see as well.
That's really exciting. And it's nice that you came out the other side and had so many benefits still. Were you one of those signs that had a bunch of planetary crazy things going on that didn't change until like January of this year? Were you one of those? I know there were like some big movements.
Well, so the Pluto transit wasn't a huge factor in my chart, but it is a big factor in my ex's chart. And so I
Oh,
did really kind of, as an astrologer, kind of witness, a lot of transits playing out for him and what he was going through. Which was, it was really hard at the time, but it did give me a lot of meaning, to kind of like what we were going through and what was changing for both of us. And I definitely think like my astrology practice was a huge support in the last year of just witnessing not only what was changing in our relationship, but also like in ourselves.
and I obviously did not, I don't know your partner's birth charts. Obviously, I didn't know that before I asked you, but I just have gotten feedback from other people that that had a big effect in a lot of people's lives. So it's really interesting that you sort of knew that. But life is funny that way, that like you could have all of these insights and not know until hindsight hits you.
Oh, yes, it's so true. And it was definitely something that really in the worst of everything that happened last year was I was really able to hold on to because I could see that it was really reflected. It wasn't random. It wasn't um I don't know, even, a lot of times we talk about transits that are really challenging, like Pluto transits or Saturn transits, right? And they can feel kind of disempowering at times because it's like, well, am I just, at the whims of the cosmos? But it didn't feel that way. It really felt like it was just a reflection of what was really happening in our lives. And it was definitely like a comfort. And I definitely turned to my practice through all of that for sure.
And then came out to the other side with a brand new book.
Yes, yeah, the book was being written in the midst of all of that, which was very chaotic and not ideal, but that's okay. And we came out the other side. Now there's this beautiful new book in the world.
The chaos does not come across in the book, I have to say. So
I'm glad. I'm glad.
so for people who are listening and are getting interested, let's chat about what exactly this new book is.
Yeah, so it's called Botanical Cocktails, which on the surface is a little bit of a departure for me. My publisher had come to me and wanted me to do a cocktail book. And at first I was a little like, I don't know, it's not really in line. My books are really spiritual. But the more that we talked about it and talked about how the premise could go, the more I really got on board with it because in many ways I think it's really a companion to my second book, which is A Modern Witch's Guide to Natural Magic. And in natural magic, it's really we walk through the whole year and I have recipes, mostly tea and essential oil recipes. But there's a few other things in there too. That really walk you through the seasons as well as the moon phases in each season, the zodiac signs, etc. And so the new book is cocktails and mocktails. There's a mocktail variation for every single recipe, and which I think is really important to say because I want to be able to appeal to lots of different people. And it's laid out the same way. So it's not as explicitly witchy. It doesn't go into the moon phase pieces and all of that, but it does walk through the seasons in the same way. And so it's really designed to be, I think, really a companion so that you can, work with plants and work with the seasons in this really celebratory way.
And I do think that, I mean, I understand what you're saying, that it seems like a little bit of a departure, but when I was getting into it, it really made sense, especially the last conversation that we had on the podcast. We did talk a lot about your daily practice and your tea rituals and things. And this sort of goes in line with that because it's a lot of, even though um, liquor is involved, but like you said, there's mocktails for everything. It's similar in the same way that you would do a tea practice or make a tea based drink, an herbal based drink. You're just adding a little bit of alcohol in.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely a really similar process, right? It could definitely be a ritual if you wanted it to be, whether you use the alcohol or not. And I think it introduces a little bit of like fun and a little bit of playfulness. I think sometimes our practice can get a little serious or we can feel like the celebration is somehow separate from the spiritual. And that's just not necessarily true. Even I was having a conversation with a friend the other day that, there's definitely conversation. I mean, I think obviously like the like sober curious conversations and things that are happening right now are really important. And also, alcohol has been something that's been really sacred in cultures for, thousands of years. And we kind of have it both ways. It's like we can take care of ourselves and treat our bodies right. And we can also have a little bit of indulgence and a little bit of play when it's really right for us.
That's how I treat it as well. I definitely used to love alcohol a lot more in my 20s, and I'm just too old for that now. Like, I can't. It does not hit you the same way, and I cannot be down for 3 days after it. So I appreciate that the recipes that you share are smaller scale. So I'm like, okay.
Yes.
I mean, and you have like sangria in here and everything, but like, I'm like, okay, I can make one. I can make one and enjoy it on, this Saturday. Actually, last Saturday, I did your strawberry moon spritz. I think it's
Oh,
called
you
one of your
did?
summer ones, and it was delicious. And I was like, okay, this is perfect for like a warm Saturday afternoon, and I can just have the one.
Oh, I absolutely love that. You are definitely one of the first people. I mean, the book, at least when we're recording this, the book isn't even quite out yet. So you're one of the first people to make one of the recipes that I absolutely love
Oh
that. And the
yes.
strawberry moon is one of my favorites.
Oh, it was like the first one that called to me. I was like, this sounds perfect. And it's like, listeners, it is set up by seasons. So these are like very seasonally appropriate cocktails. And I was like, okay, I got to pull out one of these summer ones because it's the perfect date for it. But I have to tell you, I've been looking forward to the winter ones like already because it's my favorite season. And there's so many good ones. I'm like, oh man, I can't wait.
The winter ones are fun. I love that you managed to find one of the like witchiest ones in there too.
Of course I
The
did.
strawberry moon, I slipped that in there. But yeah, the winter ones were fun to write because there's not as many obvious choices. There's especially summer. Summer was easy, right? There's so many classic recipes because most of the recipes are based on a classic, with, kind of an herbal or floral twist. And there's so many things that you just immediately think of with summer, and even with fall. But with winter, I had to get a little bit more creative, and those were fun. Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to hearing what people think of those.
I am looking forward to the snowed in. I'm looking at it right now. I was like, where's the one I like have it tabbed already? Like, I've like
Yes, that's one of my favorites too.
I started with like this tabbing process and I was like, okay, I'm going to mark these ones that I'm going to do. And then I like ended up tabbing all of them. I'm like, well, this is pointless. I don't know why I didn't bother with it. But I did remember recalling the snowed in right away. I was like, okay, this is something that I could do and is in line with the different like flavors and things that I like, but is different enough that it will be like a special occasion for me to make it.
Absolutely. I love that.
And there's, yeah, so many of them that I am excited to do. But I also wanted to say that I really appreciate the like beginning portion of the book. So it's not like just the recipes, but there's so much like background information about, plants and herbs and the tools and sourcing and all of that that can seem very overwhelming for a beginner if you're just like throwing them into a cocktail book and with different herbs and they don't know what's going on. I love that beginning section.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I really wanted to kind of set it up a little bit, both for people who might be new to making their own cocktails, which I know can be really overwhelming, right? It's one of those things. Yes, it's similar to making tea, right? Where it feels like, oh my gosh, I need all of these tools and all of these plants and all these different things to even make it worthwhile. Which I did try really hard, even on like the alcohol portion, to use a somewhat limited list of things, which is I did the same thing with the natural magic book because I didn't want to create a book where you have to go out and buy 10 million different plants that you're going to use one time, or 1,000 different liqueurs that you're going to use one time. So there's a few specialty things in there, and a lot of the recipes use like a simple syrup, that you're making with a particular plant, which is simple enough to do. It's kind of an extra step that makes it a little bit more flavorful, a little bit more special, but it doesn't require you to buy a whole bunch of things, because I just think that's really frustrating when you get a book and you need something different for every single recipe. So I tried to keep it kind of simple and straightforward in that way. But I also wanted to set it up with, here's how the glassware works, how all these different tools work that maybe you've seen, but maybe you haven't used before. But also to introduce maybe people who do like to make their own cocktails but aren't as familiar with the herbalism side. So there's definitely a little bit of setup on both.
Which I appreciated because even, for myself, I tend to drink like the same cocktails. So there was some stuff in here that was completely new to me. So being able to have like the definition of what everything is, like Campari, I've never used in my life. So I was like, oh, okay, I get it now. Like it makes sense. And I could just like tell from your writing, like whether or not like that flavor is going to work for me. And
For
then
sure.
also like in the back where you have it listed, like you have, you know, pomegranate, pineapple, pumpkin, like all alphabetically, thank you. But all the different flavors and then exactly which recipes those go in and what page. That makes me very happy as well because I know what flavors I like. And I'm like, okay, let's find this pomegranate because that's one of my favorites. And like let's go to all of those and be able to make those. So it really works like not only in finding what I love in the book, but also using up those ingredients, being like, okay, well, I've already made this simple syrup. What else in this book can I use it in?
Yeah, exactly. And I was really excited to do the index for this book again because we did it in Natural Magic, where yeah, because there's so many recipes in both books, but especially in Natural Magic, it's a bit longer. And so I really wanted to have these different appendices that would really make it easy to find a particular plant in in different places, because most of the plants in both books are used in more than one recipe. There's only a handful that are only found once. And so I wanted to make it really easy to be able to do that. If you're looking to work with a particular plant, or you like a particular type of alcohol. I'm not a big vodka fan, which you can probably tell from the book. There's not that many vodka recipes, but I'm probably going to go and find something else, right, that I like. And so I really like doing the appendices because I think they're just really helpful to not only make it easy to find what you're looking for, but also to explore other things too.
And I think you make each recipe simple enough that if there is some ingredient in there that doesn't agree with you, it's easy to either swap it out or just leave it out altogether without completely changing it. So I appreciate that as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's really important to me to encourage people to make recipes their own, whether it's a tea, an essential oil blend, a cocktail, whatever it is. Like I always tell people, like, please don't follow my recipes exactly unless you really, really like them, like really make them your own, really adapt them, swap things in and out. I'm allergic to chamomile, so I have to substitute chamomile all the time, right? It's in everything. It's in so many recipes. And so I'm really used to doing that. And I think people get really kind of nervous or self-conscious, feeling like, well, I don't know what to swap things with. And it's like, really just trust yourself, just trust your own taste, trust your intuition. What plants do you want to work with? What flavors do you actually like? Because even if there's a flavor or an ingredient that you're not a big fan of, or you have an allergy to, like I do, you may very well still like the recipe if you swap it out for something. So I'm a big, big fan and encourager of adapting things to your own wants.
And I mean, the worst that can happen is it doesn't work. You don't like it. You throw it out and you try again.
Exactly. And it does happen sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, even with some of my favorites, I'm guilty of that too. I'm like, oh, I've made this drink 20 times. And then all of a sudden I don't like it. I'm like, well, I made a mistake somewhere in mixing ingredients and I'm just going to start over. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, so true.
And I felt like so many of these recipes, especially, into the fall ones, I've been doing more ancestor work and I'm excited to be able to make these as offerings as well.
Definitely. The fall chapter is probably my favorite. It's definitely where I could get a little more particularly witchy with it just by nature of the season.
It really
Um,
is.
yeah, and I mean, I love those flavors. And actually the cocktail that I make the most, at least in the fall, not necessarily the rest of the year, is the oh gosh, I'm trying to think what we called it in the book. I think it's called Smoke and Magic Mirrors. Is the apple sage margarita. And that's become like a tradition. Like I make it for our like fall parties every year and it is so delicious and so special. So we actually do like a like girls' night, midnight margaritas, watch Practical Magic and drink that recipe party every year.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's so much fun.
It's so fun.
Oh, and now I really want to do that too. Like add that to my list. I don't have too many like witchy friends, or at least ones that don't admit that they're witches. But then
Sure.
everything that they do is super witchy, especially in October. And I feel like that would be perfect. And I love that every single one of them, when they announced that there's going to be a new Practical Magic, like every single one of them was like messaging me about it. I'm like, obviously, we're gonna have this party, and I'm gonna make these cocktails.
Absolutely. I'm totally on board.
And I love apple flavored cocktails. So good. So excited.
It is such a delicious one. Like it was like the first, when I was brainstorming and making lists for the different seasons, I was like, well, obviously that one's going in there because I make it every single year. And it's really good because it really has a very layered flavor. It has the like sweetness of the apple from cider, and it has the smokiness. You smoke the sage, and I make it with mezcal. Although if you're not as much into the smoke, you could make it with just Blanco tequila. Um, and then it's still a margarita. It has that lime flavor in there. It's really a very layered, it's a really very layered recipe. It's absolutely one of my favorites.
Speaking of listing them out, how did you come up with or decide all of the recipes? Like, obviously, you had made that one before. That's kind of a staple. You knew you were going to include that one. Are these all ones that you have been making throughout your life, or did you come up with some just for the book?
Yeah, so most of them are specific to the book. The only ones really that are not are that one. There's one in the winter chapter. I think that we called it Trimming the Tree, which is actually my best friend's her mom. It's her mom's recipe. And that one's just like kind of a classic, again, kind of a tradition. So that one had to go in there. But most of them are really not are really specific to the book, are not necessarily things I had made prior. But like I said, most of them are based on a classic. So like I really listed out, the different types of alcohols that I wanted to cover, and classic cocktails for each, and then kind of went through and paired them with the seasons. and then really went back through and said, okay, where are we going to pull the flowers, the herbs, the fruits, etc., in for the botanical aspect? So like one of my favorite recipes in there is the dark and stormy. I think we called it summer storm clouds, and it is in the summer chapter. I love a dark and stormy, and so a lot of the intros to the recipes have a little story about like my connection to either the plant or to the particular cocktail that it's based on. And that one, gosh, many years ago, my best friend and I were in Wales. And as I said, I'm not a big vodka fan, and she was always trying to figure out at the time like what cocktails I would actually like. And she got it in her head that I would like a dark and stormy. And so we were traveling, and there was this little pub, and we went there a few nights in a row. We were staying in the town, and we were drinking dark and stormies in this little pub, and it just like they immediately make me think of that trip and that time. So a lot of them are based on something like that, a place or a trip or something along those lines, but not necessarily, the exact recipe with the botanicals. Those really came more specifically for the book.
That's so fun to have those memories like committed to paper like that for you in this book format.
Yeah, it's so true.
I mean, we talked about the Apple one in the fall. Do you have any other particular favorites that are in here beside that one?
Let me think. Okay, another particular favorite. In fact, it's probably the very first one I wrote for the book because I had the idea and was like, okay, writing that idea down, right? Is the rose cocktail in the spring chapter. It's called Love Potion number 75 because it's based on a French 75. But it's actually a very, like, if you don't like rose, this one's not for you because it's very rosy, but I do. And so it has sparkling rosé and rose water in it. And it's absolutely beautiful, and it's a really sweet, just like spring sipping kind of a drink.
I was going to say the pictures are really pretty. Did you take these?
No, my photographer's name is Jade. Her company is Lilies and Horns Photos. She's not quite local to me, but a few hours away. And she's amazing. She's an incredible photographer. And she's been a friend and a client for years. And so Jade comes down and, periodically and crashes at my house, and we do a photo shoot. And so she did all the photos for the book.
Oh my gosh, they turned out so beautiful. I don't know if when I make my cocktails that they're all going to look this nice. I have to say.
She is very talented. We also, so if you'll notice all the photos in the book have different glassware, and they're all colored glassware and really unique, which almost all of the glasses I borrowed from my grandmother, who has a collection of colored glasses. So when she finds usually only a single at, an antique store or something, when she's out, she'll buy the single colored glasses. So she has this beautiful collection in a window of like rainbow colored glasses. So I went over to her house and picked through all of them and picked out glasses for each one we were going to photograph, which was really fun.
Oh, that's so cute. What a good idea.
Yeah, it was really fun because I had the list of the ones we were going to do photos of. And then I just went and like picked through her collection, and we wrapped them all up for the photo shoot. It was great.
Oh, well, that's so sweet that she would even like let you take all of those, her prized possessions.
Yeah, it was great. She was like, "Yeah, of course. Come on over."
Yeah, because I was really wondering. I was like, I know there was a green one that caught my eye that I was like, where did you even find a green? It was like a mojito that was in there. I was like, where did this green glass even come from? It's gorgeous. Now I need like all colored glassware.
I know, right? And I said in the book at one point, I'm like, you don't need fancy glassware. You can make pretty much anything in, a wine glass or a tumbler or whatever you have is totally fine. And for the purposes of the book, it might as well be pretty.
Which makes sense, but now it just makes me want all of them. Comes across on the cover too. It's very colorful, pretty.
Yes. Yeah, I really wanted to lean into the just like kind of bright, fun, colorful, playful kind of an energy, which is a little bit different. My first two books I think are much more grounded feeling, much more earthy, which is really my style in a lot of ways. But with this one, it just felt like it made sense for it to be a little bit more fun.
I like it. I think that really came across and it was a good call, good decision.
Thank you.
For somebody who is, now interested in this and going to pick it up for the first time, maybe they were checking it out, do you have any advice or recommendations on where they would get started if they've never made a, cocktail specifically with like witchcraft or spirituality in mind?
Yeah, I think that the seasons really are such a great place to start with it because we often tailor the beverages that we're drinking to the season, whether it's on purpose or not, right? So often, like, we want to go out for a margarita with our friends in the summer when it's warm, we want to sip something warm and cozy in the winter by the fire, right? Like, it's just very natural. And so I think just kind of leaning into that natural instinct of, what do I actually want right now, I think is really important. And that goes for, whether you're making cocktails, mocktails, tea, etc., right? It's like, what am I actually really craving? What is going to feel really in alignment? I think this was definitely in the proposal that I wrote for this book. I can't remember if it made it into the book anywhere, but in the proposal, I remember writing something to the effect of like, it would feel so strange to like, drink a hot toddy by the pool, right? Like that's just, we're not going to do that probably. And if that's the intuitive hit you're having, go for it. But like most of the time, right, we have this kind of natural inclination to things that feel very seasonal, whether it's the flavor, the plant, the temperature, right? And so I think that there is something very inherently magical and spiritual about that, right? When we are working with plants and flavors that are either in season or that balance the season in some way, and we're working with things that we just kind of feel naturally drawn to, and paying attention to that, right? Rather than just sort of dismissing it as like, well, yeah, we drink margaritas in the summer, right? Really leaning into like, okay, well, why? Why do I feel drawn to this particular flavor or this particular plant? And what does that plant actually mean, right? We didn't really get into the like metaphysical properties of the plants as much in this book, but there's great resources. My last book, Natural Magic, really goes deeply into that, and there's so many great books out there on correspondences and magical properties. And really leaning into, well, why do I feel drawn to this particular plant or this particular ally, and how can I actually work with its energy in a more intentional way?
I think that's great advice and absolutely makes sense. Obviously, I started with the summer cocktails as soon as I had it in hand. It's like, okay, this just makes sense for what this day is telling me. I think that's a great way to
Exactly.
go about it. And it's something that I use in my own life as a way to sort of stay in the moment and stay in the day. Because I'm sure this comes up for you too. Making content tends to mentally put you way ahead of what the actual season is because you have to think so far ahead. And I'm sure this is even worse with books. You have to think so far ahead as far as publishing and what you're going to be creating and lining all those things up, that content creators tend to be like 3 months ahead in their minds. And I struggle with that, but I'm like already thinking like fall. And I'm like, it is June. It's June when we're recording. It's like I need to take a minute and enjoy what June and July actually have to offer and not be so mentally already in September.
Yes, I totally get that. Yeah, it's actually funny because even long before I had, a podcast or was doing content online, growing up, my mom had a flower shop, and we ran it just the two of us for many years. And so she really did the flowers, and I did the gifts, kind of. And when you work in retail like that, we would be ordering like our Christmas, ornaments and everything for the store, it literally in July. And if not earlier, that was maybe even a little late, right? We were maybe a little behind. And it really throws you off because you're constantly thinking ahead. And I think that there's one, I always kind of say like, there's nothing really wrong with it. Like, when we are excited about the next thing, I think that's okay, as long as we're not just completely living in the future, right? And I think that plants are such a great way to kind of bring you back into whatever the current season is and the current energy, because they are so natural, right? We feel so drawn to the things that are in season, right? Even though we have this ability now to have, most of our like fruits and veggies all year long, right? We import them, we grow them in greenhouses, etc. We still feel really drawn to the things that are actually really in season. And that's just, I think, very human, and really trusting that and like even if we are kind of future tripping and thinking about Halloween, which I'm not gonna lie, my roommate and I were talking about this morning. But nonetheless, right, we're still excited about picking the strawberries from the garden and really working with the things that are really in season right now. And so I think plants are just a great way. I mean, they're always a great way to ground us, bring us back to the earth, right? Like what's actually happening on the earth right now. And that I think is one of my most important spiritual practices is that kind of awareness of the weather and the seasonal patterns and what's growing, what's blooming, especially when you live somewhere in this, a similar location for a long time, you really start to notice the patterns and the way things shift or were different from last year, maybe because the weather was a little different or whatever, but you really start to see those repeating themes and the things that grow and bloom at a certain time. And I think that just that awareness is so powerful, and you can really take it to the next level when you're working with plants in an herbal way.
And I think that a lot of witches are more familiar with that than we give ourselves credit for. Because, in looking through the your plant profiles section in here, and I'm like, okay, I'm currently drawn to the cocktails that are featuring strawberry and lavender. Why is that? And your plant profiles say right there, well, this is strawberry and lavender season that we're in right now. So that's why I'm like, okay, I want those in my cocktails. It just makes sense. Like someplace deep in the recesses of my brain, I know.
Exactly, exactly. Well, and what's so funny is like the spring and summer cocktails and the fall to an extent, right? We're really drawn to what's in season, especially spring and summer. You get into fall and like, okay, sure, we have squash and pumpkins and things like that are in season. We're also really drawn to the spices at that time, which are not necessarily, they don't necessarily have a season, right? But we're really drawn to them at that time. And I think there's a lot of really interesting reasons. In fact, I've written some articles and things about it. There's a website I write for called Whimsy Soul, and I think we have at least one, maybe multiple articles about like fall spices. I think it's a really interesting topic, right? They're very warming. They really warm us up during this time when things are starting to get colder and darker. And then as we get into winter, we actually there's definitely some things that are in season, right? Like the pomegranates, etc. But we also, and the citrus, which I think is a really lovely like balance to winter. It's in season, but it feels very bright and summery. But we also tend to go towards things that are actually technically in season in spring and summer, like mint, but they really balance out that kind of dreary energy that we can wind up in winter. And so I think it's really cool how the plants really support us, whether they're in season and that's how they're supporting us, or they're somehow balancing the season.
Absolutely agree. Mint is one of my favorites that I associate with Yule. And it might not like make sense at first, but most people have mint around that time, peppermint. And I think it does make sense because it is a solar celebration. We are paying attention to what the sun is doing at that time. So it's kind of just a part of that cycle that I include in my Yule celebrations.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, before we wrap up, I just want to say thank you so much for being here today and for chatting about this. I know we covered a lot of different topics all throughout the book, but I think that listeners are really going to appreciate this overview before they dive in and figure out if this is right for them. But I do think that it's going to be a great resource. It's a great add to your lineup, to your collection. But I do think it's going to be a really great resource for people to be able to use throughout the year.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, when I really landed on the okay, we're going to organize it seasonally, just like the last book, I was like, oh, okay, it's a companion. These two books absolutely go together. And I think they do really kind of build and expand on each other.
Yeah, they really do. I think they make sense together. And I think that there's both of them, there's something in it for everyone.
Oh, thank you.
And I do want to shout out, I know some people are not fans of the alcohol, but you did a really great job of including the mocktail options for every single drink. That was brilliant too.
Thank you. Yeah, it's so common in cocktail books for like 5 to 10 of the recipes to have a mocktail variation. And I was like, I don't understand that. Why wouldn't it just be all of them, right? If you're going to do it, like you might as well do it and, really make it so that not only does it appeal to more people, but that, even if you do like to drink cocktails, you might not want to all the time. And I think especially in the summer, I feel like it's always really nice to have just like a nice flavored beverage, something that feels a little fancy. So yeah, I really wanted to do that. And it was a kind of a fun challenge for some of them. There's certain things, a lot of the recipes, it's really just, we're increasing the mixer, we're increasing the fruit juice, etc. And I definitely encourage people to play with it if you are making the mocktails. Like, it can get a little bit more sweet. So you want to just play with like what actually works for you, what makes sense. But some of them, the substitution is not so obvious. So that was really fun, actually, making sure that they all had that option.
They are a lot of fun, and I think it just opens up to a wider audience. So it really comes across that you kind of thought about everybody and really wanted to make a very inclusive book.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much for being here today and chatting again. It was lovely to have you on for the second time. And listeners, of course, I'm going to have everything linked that we talked about. So if you want to order the book and get your hands on it, and I'm also going to link the previous episode in case you missed the last time we got to chat.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me.
And listeners, that's everything that I have for you this week. I will see you all next week.
Need even more witchcraft in your life? Subscribe to Witch Wednesdays on Patreon and YouTube for all types of exclusive bonus content like spells, recipes, book reviews, and more, or even order personalized tarot readings and spells. Be sure to follow on Instagram at Witch Wednesdays Podcast, and you can find all these links and more at witchwednesdays.com.